and girls, it's Mrs. Hinkle, and I'm here to read you a story called A Bad Case of Stripes. And this is by David Shannon. So he is the author and the illustrator of this story. Camellia Cream loved lima beans, but she never ate them. All of her friends hated lima beans, and she wanted to fit in. Camellia always worried about what other people thought of her. Today, she was fretting even more than usual. It was the first day of school, and she couldn't decide what to wear. There are so many people to impress. She tried on 42 outfits, but none seemed quite right. She put on a pretty red dress and looked in the mirror, and then she screamed. Her mother ran into the room, and she screamed too. "Oh my heavens," she cried. "You're completely covered in stripes." That was certainly true. Camellia was striped from head to toe. She looked like a rainbow. Mrs. Cream felt Camelia's forehead. "Do you feel all right?" she asked. "I feel fine," Camellia answered, "but just look at me." "You've got to get back in bed this instant," her mother ordered. "You're not going to school today." Camellia was relieved. She didn't want to miss her first day of school, but she was afraid of what the other kids would say, and she had no idea what to wear with those crazy stripes. That afternoon, Dr. Bumble came to examine Camellia. "Most extraordinary," he exclaimed. "I've never seen anything like it. Are you having any coughs, sneezing, runny nose, aches, pains, chills, hot flashes, dizziness, drowsiness, shortness of breath, or uncontrollable twitching?" "No," Camellia told him. "I feel fine." "Well then," Dr. Bumble said, turning to Mrs. Cream, "I don't see any reason why she shouldn't go to school tomorrow. Here's some ointment that should help clear up those stripes in a few days. If it doesn't, you know where to reach me." And off he went. The next day was a disaster. Everyone at school laughed at Camellia. They called her Camellia Crayon and Knight of the Living Lollipop. She tried her best to act as if everything were normal, but when the class said the Pledge of Allegiance, her stripes turned red, white, and blue, and she broke out in stars. The other kids thought this was great. One yelled out, "Let's see some purple polka dots." Sure enough, Camellia turned all purple polka dotty. Someone else shouted, "Checkerboard," and patterned squares covered her skin. Soon everyone was calling out different shapes and colors, and poor Camellia was changing faster than you can change the channels on your TV. That night, Mr. Harms, the school principal, called. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Cream," he said. "I'm going to have to ask you to keep Camellia home from school. She just is too much of a distraction, and I've been getting calls from other parents. They're afraid those stripes might be contagious." Camellia was so embarrassed. She couldn't believe that 2 days ago everyone liked her. Now nobody wanted to be in the same room as her. Her father tried to make her feel better. "Is there anything I can get you, sweetheart?" he asked. "No, thank you," she said. What she really wanted was a nice plate of lima beans, but she had been laughed at for enough for one day. "Well, yes, I see," Dr. Bumble mumbled when Mrs. Cream phoned him the next day. "I think I'd better bring some specialists. We'll be right over." About an hour later, Dr. Bumble arrived with 4 people in long white coats. He introduced them to the Creams. "This is Dr. Group, Dr. Sponge, and Dr. Cricket, and Dr. Young." The specialists went to work on Camellia. They squeezed and jabbed, tapped and tested. It was very uncomfortable. "Well, it's not the bumps," concluded Dr. Grump. "Or the measles," said Dr. Sponge. "Definitely not the chicken pox," put in Dr. Cricket. "Or a sunburn," said Dr. Young. "Try these," said the specialist. They each handed a bottle filled with different colored pills. "Take one of each before bed," said Dr. Group, and they filed out the door, followed by Dr. Bumble. That night, Camellia took her medicine. It was awful. When she woke up the next morning, she didn't feel different, but when she got dressed, her clothes didn't fit her right. She looked in the mirror, and there, staring back at her, was a giant, multicolored pill with her face on it. Dr. Bumble rushed over as soon as Mrs. Cream called, but this time, instead of specialists, he brought experts. Dr. Gord, Dr. Mellon were the first science minds in the land. They were the finest scientific minds in the land. Once again, Camellia was poked at, prodded, looked at, and listened to. The experts wrote down lots of numbers, and then they huddled together and whispered. Dr. Gord finally spoke. "It might be a virus," he announced with authority. Suddenly, fuzzy fireballs appeared all over Camellia. "Or possibly a bacteria," said Dr. Mellon, and out popped squiggly little bacteria tails. "Or it could be a fungus," added Dr. Gord. Instantly, Camellia was covered in different colored fungus blotches. The experts looked at Camellia and each other. "We need to go over the numbers and we'll get back from the lab," said Dr. Gord. "We'll call you when we know something." But the experts didn't have a clue, much less a cure. By now, the TV news had found out about Camellia. Reporters from every channel were outside her house, telling the story of the bizarre case of the incredible changing kid. Soon a huge crowd was camped out in front of the front lawn. The Creams were swamped with all kinds of remedies, from psychologists, allergists, herbalists, nutritionists, psychics, old medicine men, a guru, even a veterinarian. Each so-called cure only added to poor Camelia's strange appearance until it was hard to even recognize her. She sprouted roots, berries, and crystals, feathers, and a long, furry tail, but nothing worked. One day, an old woman who called herself the environmental therapist claimed she had a cure for Camellia. "Close your eyes," she said, "breathe deeply, and become one with the room." "I wish you hadn't said that," Camellia groaned. Slowly, she started melting into the walls of her room. Her bedroom became her mouth. Her nose was her dresser. The two paintings were her eyes. The therapist screamed and ran out of the house. "What are we going to do?" cried Mrs. Cream. "It just keeps getting worse and worse and worse," she sobbed. At that moment, Mr. Cream heard a quiet knock at the front door. He opened it, and there stood an old woman who was plump as sweet as a strawberry. "Excuse me," she said brightly. "I think I can help." She went to Camelia's room and looked around. "My goodness," she said with a shake of her head. "What we have here is a bad case of the stripes. One of the worst cases I've ever seen." She pulled a container of small green beans from her bag. "Here," she said, "these might do the trick." "Are those magical beans?" asked Mr. Cream. "Oh, no," said the kind old woman. "There's no such thing. These are just plain old lima beans. I bet you'd like some, wouldn't you?" she asked Camellia. Camellia wanted a big heaping plate full of lima beans more than anything, but she was afraid to admit it. "Yuck," she said. "No one likes lima beans, especially me." "Oh dear," said the old woman sadly. "I guess I was wrong about you." She put the beans back in her bag and started toward the door. Camellia watched the old woman walk away. Those beans would taste so good, and being laughed at for eating them was nothing compared to what she's been going through. She finally couldn't stand it. "Wait! The truth is, I really love lima beans." "I thought so," said the old woman with a smile. She took a handful of beans and popped them into Camelia's mouth. "Mmm," she said. Suddenly, the branches, feathers, squiggling tails all began to disappear. Then the whole room swirled around. When it stopped, there stood Camellia. Everything was back to normal. "I'm cured," she shouted. "Yes," said the old woman. "I knew it was really you in there somewhere." She patted her on the head, and she went outside and vanished into the crowd. Afterward, Camellia wasn't quite the same. Some of the kids at school said she was weird, but she didn't care. She ate all the lima beans she wanted, and she never had even a touch of the stripes again. Thank you, boys and girls.